Story 1. I'm a wedding videographer. At every wedding, I work with a photographer. Sometimes I get along with them, sometimes not. Anyways, I'm working with this photo team at a wedding. We're doing family photos, which is the worst part of the day. It's just a long, drawn out 30 minutes of people not knowing where to stand, yelling for people who have walked away and were supposed to be in the next group photo, dealing with kids, etc. I overhear one of the photographers whisper to the other, "Sometimes when I'm having a rough time in family photos, I like to imagine everything everyone says came from behind a closed bedroom door with a very strong implication of adult intent." That was years ago, and to this day, I can't help but think of it at every wedding. Hearing someone say something like, "Grandpa, get back over here, we're not done with you in the middle," is now the bane of my existence. Story 2. A woman on the phone with her mother crying about how the man she was having an affair with was cheating on her. "My ex-wife cheated on me and left me for the guy she cheated with." About a year later, I'm talking with one of my employees about a situation involving my ex and her boyfriend, and I said his first name, and my employee said, "Wait, do you mean first and last name?" I said yes, and she said, "That's the guy I've been seeing from Tinder for the last month." So that was extremely satisfying. Story 3. My dad and I were talking about work, and my sister overheard him saying he needed to send out a crew to shoot some witnesses. We are land surveyors. A witness is a marker in the ground that serves as a reference to another point. Shoot in this case means to take a measurement on the corner with a GPS unit. But my little sister didn't know that lingo and thought there were some secrets about the family business that she hadn't been privy to. That reminds me of a couple of summers in high school when an adult friend of mine taught me how to hang drywall. We're up on scaffolding holding a 80 pounds, 12 feet sheet of half-in, thick drywall over our heads and making sure it's lined up and squared before screwing it to the framing. Right before he drives the first screw, he shouts at me over his shoulder, "My butt's tight. Is your butt tight?" Silence. He realized that I never heard that expression before and that it's a very sheetrockery thing to say. Then we both started to laugh and almost dropped the sheet, nearly ending a coworker. It ended up being really wholesome and funny, but for a few moments there I thought my longtime adult friend had revealed his true intentions on seeing me all sweaty and covered with sawdust and gypsum. Story 4. It's not so messed up, but I'll never forget it. I was walking towards the subway when I saw what looked like a homeless man in a wheelchair, who had no legs, like just torso, going alongside a very tall man in a very nice suit, coming towards me. As I passed the two men, the one in the wheelchair said, "So the blind chick was grabbing my family jewels?" That's all I heard from their conversation. I wish I didn't have anywhere to be, otherwise I would have followed them to hear the rest of this story. So the blind chick was grabbing my family jewels. I truly hope those words echo in my head when I am an old man, taking his final breaths on his deathbed. Story 5. I overheard a guy in my school, whom I didn't know because he was 2 years younger than me, telling someone over the phone that he didn't want to live anymore. He was so tired of being lonely all the time and getting bullied day in, day out. His crying pierced my soul. I was really popular at that time, had a lot of friends, was always pulling pranks with them, knew the teachers pretty well. So one day, me and my best friend followed him to the bathroom. This sounds so weird, but we had been observing him, and we knew he hid in the toilets during breaks. And we kind of started a conversation on how his shirt was really cool and that we were a fan of the same band as him. And then we invited him to sit with us, and we kept that up until we graduated. And to this day, we're still friends. I regularly checked up on him during the time I knew he was depressed without ever telling him I had overheard him when he was on the phone. He's doing great now. He's in his second year of music academy. I don't know if we saved his life, but I sure bet we made it a little easier for him. And seriously, he's become one of my best friends. Such a sweet kid then. And still a great guy now. Story 6. I was at work walking past some contractors sitting on a bench smoking. All I heard was one guy say to the other, "Well, she already took the best years of your life. Why shouldn't she take half of everything you own?" He then started laughing uncontrollably. The whole time the other guy was sitting with his head in his hands, obviously upset. I feel this deep. When I was going through a divorce, I had a friend take me out bar hopping. At one of the stops, he's smashed and starts telling me all the things I need to do to get her back. I need a break from it, so go take a piss. The girl that was sitting next to me happens to walk out of the women's bathroom at the same time. She looks at me and says, "That man is not your friend," and walks away. Story 7. I was sitting with three friends in a quite noisy restaurant. We talked all the time while we waited for our food, but the one moment we didn't say something, we heard someone from the group of women in their 50s sitting one table behind us say, "Did you get the stains out of the carpet?" We all heard it, but one of my friends just bursted out, "Did you hear that?" Well, the conversation at the table behind us directly stopped, and I almost pissed myself, trying not to laugh too much. Story 8. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. My parents and I were staying the night at my aunt and uncle's house. They were laying in the guest bed, and I was on a pallet on the floor of the same room trying to sleep. After trying to sleep for quite some time one night, I could hear my dad whisper to my mom, "I think he is asleep." A moment later, my mom whispered back in an adult way, "Show me what you used to do." And they began audibly making out, breathing loudly and quietly moaning. Mind you, I was adopted and they were in their late 60s. I was far too young to be hearing what my dad used to do to my mom. As I lay there uncomfortably listening to the time machine they were going down, my stomach started to turn, and I finally blocked my dad and belted out, "Dad, my tummy hurts." He took me to the kitchen to get some stomach medicine. Story 9. I used to work with a maintenance tech who had formerly worked in corrections. One day he was outside having a smoke when I came up and lit my own, and he casually continued his conversation with our other tech. He was busy explaining that he worked overnights at the prison, and they were chronically understaffed. So when one night he did his rounds and came upon an inmate being gang abused in his cell, he wasn't allowed to physically intervene because it would be a 5 volts 1 situation. He had to wait for backup, which he knew wouldn't be available because they were understaffed. He told the guys to go easy on him. That still sticks with me. Story 10. I once overheard my manager and his subordinate in the break room saying that no one will find out about the off-the-book stuff they were doing. They were buying material using company money and doing their own work. They didn't know I was there because I was in the next room changing into my normal clothes. A few weeks later, they were both caught and no longer work where I am. It was revealed they'd been doing it for 4 years and both made $600,000 each. Story 11. I was studying with a friend in their dorm in college. It was a suited dorm with a shared bathroom. Heard multiple girls going into the bathroom together frantically and turning the shower on. Voice 1 was sobbing uncontrollably. Then I heard her say, "I told him no. I told him I kept telling him to stop." Voice 2 responded with something along the lines of, "Hey, I know you did. It's going to be okay. Let's wash the blood off first." Horrified me. I will never forget the way her voice and her sobs sounded. I was an RA and was required to report the situation because of my job. I had been through a similar situation. I knew how hard it was and wanted to check on her, but because I was a male, I didn't feel my presence would help in the situation. Called a female RA over to come check on her. Felt completely powerless not being able to check on her myself. Story 12. This was something my mom overheard, not me. And it's messed up in the sense that it's so sad, it messes with my heart every time I think about it. When my dad was sick in the hospital, there was a little boy, maybe 7 years old, a few rooms down from him. It wasn't the ICU, but it also wasn't just for folks who needed one night stay to get better, if that makes sense. I think it was around Christmas time when this happened, so one night my mom was leaving to head home, and she overheard the little boy crying with his parents. As she walked by his room, she heard him say, "But Mommy, I've been so good this year. Am I in here because Santa thinks I was bad? I'll do better next year, I promise." Story 13. I overheard a conversation out in public between a couple where the woman, in a chilling, somber tone, said, "I can't even look at you knowing that your father was performing human experimentations." I went into full casual snoop mode to get the tea. The more I listened and watched, the clearer it was that this woman was going through some mental health crisis. Her pattern of speech was so bizarre, and her sentences slipped in and out of coherency. The poor man just looked so defeated. They were both dressed like they were in dire straits, and the man had this expression on his face like he was realizing the reality that his partner was losing it. Story 14. I've overheard a Belgian Christian girl on a train telling her friends about her romantic history. Basically, she identified as hetero and dated men, then bi, then lesbian, and dated women. She was certain that she was a lesbian and that she dated men uniquely because that's what society expected her to do. She then got deeper into religion, got more involved within her church, and now identifies as a lesbian dating men because that's what the church considers proper. And she told her friends that she's not attracted at all to her boyfriend and would date women if she was not religious. She said all this very loudly and cheerfully while I was trying to sleep. I found it very sad. Story 15. When I was little, my mom and I were at a library next to my dance studio waiting for my dance class. A guy on the phone, speaking quietly but not that quiet, was saying, "So many girls in this area, and they are all wearing little tutus. You really got to come check them out. They are basically asking for it." My mom and another woman nearby went to the police station, also next door, to file a report. The police did nothing. A couple months later, we found out the police station was covering up crimes of a child predator. It made national news, I think, at least regional news. So I lost my trust in the police when I was very young, but sadly, that wasn't the first time I got a bad feeling about a creepy man. This world sucks. Story 16. Woman I worked with thought everyone had already left, and I got to listen to the conversation with her and her ex-husband. Man was pleading with her to let him see his teenage daughter more often, and she was insisting on more alimony and child support. He told her he was already living in a trailer and going into debt to pay for his daughter's private school and couldn't afford more. The woman said he would come up with what she was asking for, or she would show the daughter the DNA test that showed she wasn't actually his daughter. I don't think I've ever felt as bad for a guy and as nauseated by a woman so instantly in my life. Story 17. In my teenage years, I had a girlfriend and she had a younger sister. Around that time, her parents divorced. All the kids, three sisters and one brother in total, took mom to her side and didn't want any contact with their dad anymore because he cheated on mom. Except for my girlfriend's younger sister, she was just 11. She loved her dad, something which is totally normal and understandable, even though her dad really did a crappy thing. It was my girlfriend's birthday, and the whole family was there, aunts, uncles, and grandparents. I never saw anything like it, but they took stabs towards the youngest sister, who still wanted to be in contact with her dad. Again and again, just foul remarks and making fun of her. The entire family's just relentless. And she sat there just taking it one after the other. I could see her breaking down slowly. It was so cruel. Just viciously going after an 11-year-old girl. How the heck could they do something like that? Even her mom was in on it. Nobody protected her, nor took her side. I was shocked. I never expected her entire family to turn on her like that. At first, I didn't know what to do or say. I only know it made me very angry, upset, and sickened by it. I exploded, and I don't know what I exactly said at that moment, but it was enough for me to grab the hand of the younger sister, who was clearly heartbroken, just as I was about this ordeal, and we left. Didn't know what to do. I was only a teenager myself, 16. So I called my parents. I told them everything about how the whole family turned on my girlfriend's younger sister. My father picked us up, and she stayed with us that evening. Turns out my father went back there and set the whole family straight that this is something that is not done. Needless to say, I wasn't welcome anymore for a long time at my girlfriend's place. A year later, she became my ex-girlfriend. The younger sister moved to live with her dad. Maybe not the best dad in the world, but at least someone who treated her right. I'm 33 now. The youngest sister is 27 now. We are still very close. She knows I have her back even when the whole world is turned against her, and I know she'll have mine. Story 18. Not overheard, but read. In a massive work meeting at my school, it's in an auditorium. I'm sitting next to this older teacher who has a significant other who is from the country we're working in. He's a bit older, so the text font on his phone was rather large. We were from different countries, and neither country was a Portuguese-speaking one, but apparently we both speak or read it. He was texting another woman, not his partner, who I know who only speaks English and Chinese. The stuff they were talking about over text was very explicit, and I felt bad for his partner because he was obviously cheating on her. I didn't want to read his phone, but from my seat in the auditorium, I had to look towards my left to see the stage. He was sitting to my left and had his phone screen just beaming right at me. Story 19. Been bartending for years. A high-ranking police officer was in and got drunk, started talking about the governor's hilarious code name on the phone, which I can't post here for obvious reasons. Referenced it 3 weeks later, and he was white as a sheet. Didn't know his higher-ups were with him when I said it, but the bar was empty, and one of them hadn't heard the code name. So they called the officer who came up with it to get the full story. Married couple arguing because the wife left town for a night and her husband was caught in the hot tub with three easy girls, chocolate, vanilla, and cinnamon. Yes, they were black, white, and Latina. They were all doing cocaine off the wife's MacBook, all fully nude. His defense was, "At least you didn't catch me with them." He left. I gave the wife a free shot and a hug since she was a regular. She dropped his credit card and tipped an obscene amount after we talked for a bit. A husband and wife were some of the only people left in the bar. Just got another round. And the husband says, "If I get you any drunker, you're going to take this cage off." And she said, "I lost the key 2 weeks ago." This man was shook. I had to walk away on that one. And just remember, if you think the bartender isn't listening, you're underestimating A, how good we are at multitasking, and B, how much we love being a fly on the wall. Story 20. Being in a van driving from Ensenada to Tijuana with some Christian missionaries, I was visiting a friend who was based out there. I remember thinking, don't say but. Americans consider that a swear word, and I didn't want to be disrespectful. The guys in the back were reminiscing over how they tied puppies up in bags and threw them into the ocean. Not a hint or suggestion of remorse. They were almost gloating. It made me feel almost glad to be an atheist. There and then, I wanted to not be associated with religion, faith, or these individuals. I know this isn't a causation, just a one-off experience. But the level of hypocrisy and evil demonstrated utterly disgusted me. Because I was a guest to them, and I was with my friend, who too would have shared my view had he heard them, I decided to bite my lip. I am not an aggressive person, and I hate confrontation, but needless cruelty to animals is something I will not stand for. Story 21. Standing in the check cashing line at PLS 10 years ago, me and 10 other people got to listen to a woman insult and berate her partner. She, using a conversational volume and tone, said the most awful crap to this guy. Then, when I thought it had gone way too far, she started insulting his family and friends. The guy only ever said in a quiet whisper, "Please stop." She stood there insulting him until he cashed the check and handed over the money. Then they walked out together and left. I'll never forget that. Story 22. Not heard, but me being overheard. As a labor and delivery nurse, sometimes we have patients admitted for preterm labor. I was reporting off to the provider of my assigned PT when asked how the patient was doing. I responded that she was doing good, but that there had been some irritability all night. But I had just gotten her to use the bathroom and she was doing better. When Elle came in to report to the patient later to let her know who was taking over, the patient looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I was in a bad mood. I tried to be nice last night and this morning." She saw my confusion and continued to say, "I heard you tell the doctor Elle was irritable last night, but Elle was better this morning." I started to laugh and explained to the patient that Elle was talking about her uterus and the slight minor cramping she had been doing all night that resolved once she went to the bathroom. I told her that's what we called that type of uterine activity, and that she had been a very nice patient. When Elle reported to the doc, Elle didn't realize the patient's door was slightly open, and she overheard me talking to the doc. From that moment on, Elle always makes sure to either move away from an open door or close it when reporting off to a doc. Story 23. My mother was a widow and I was the youngest of 5 kids from a different father than the rest. One day, angry at my brother, who had a learning disability, she screams at him, "It's a good thing your father isn't here. He'd hate you for being like this and he would beat it out of you," referring to a mistake he made, as he couldn't read due to his disability. I remember it being such a F-ed moment, but I was like 5 years old, so I asked my other brother, the oldest, for some clarification as to what she meant. It was wrong, it felt wrong, but I knew I was missing some context, even at my young age. I then learned their father had a similar learning disability, and though high-functioning military background and a fireman, their father couldn't read well, and always hated it, and masked it his entire adult life. He was also, by today's standard, a physically abusive parent, but back in the day you could get away with it without anyone blinking an eye. They all remembered life with their dad, so the comment really shook my brother's life up, who was 11 at the time, but their father passed away before the disability was apparent. And he was the only sibling who got that recessive trait. And as much as myself and that brother did not get along well, at all, that comment was still so far into the upper stratosphere of messed up. I remember it clearly as the first day I lost all respect for my parent, and there were many more moments after, but none that stung quite like that one, and it wasn't even directed at me. One of the next comments was her trying to backpedal the convo after cool down, making my brother feel worse when she explained just how much his father hated that part of his life, and it was a blessing their father passed before it was known, as he might have disowned and abandoned the family, and it would have been my brother's fault if that happened to her instead of him passing away, doubling down on the damage for a kid who missed his dad. They also have a half sibling older than all of us, who their father abandoned.